In this episode,
I could walk downstairs in the Altogether if I wanted and put the kettle on.
Absolute nonsense. It's never going to be 14 years.
To me, is a perfect example of why the ROI calculation is so difficult to quote.
This is what will really happen, but I'm not actually allowed to tell you that.
Basically, what you need to do is have some capital. If you haven't got any capital, you're screwed.
It's not AI, it's not a chatbot.
I've never known anybody go for a gas boiler and wonder how quickly that's going to pay back for itself.
I think heat pumps are amazing.
welcome to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and today we're tackling a topic that's gaining momentum as more homeowners in the UK embrace renewable energy, the role of solar PV and battery storage in supporting air source heat pumps. We'll be exploring how these technologies can work together to make heating systems even more sustainable and efficient, particularly for homeowners looking to reduce their energy bills and carbon footprint. Joining me today are three experts with extensive knowledge in this area: Laurence Bradbury from Aurium Energy, Simon Smith from SA Energy, and Brian Beaver from GivEnergy. Welcome, everybody. Before we get started, we'd like to thank GivEnergy for sponsoring today's episode. GivEnergy is the UK's #1 home battery provider, and their mission is to empower energy freedom for everyone. As part of that mission, they provide hugely popular battery storage systems that combine some of the smartest hardware and software in the game. But GivEnergy is about more than just batteries alone. They also provide an end-to-end ecosystem of products spanning inverters, battery systems, EV chargers, energy management apps, grid services, and a host of supporting accessories. Each year, the average GivEnergy customer saves 85% on their energy bills and reduces their carbon emissions by 300 kilograms. These kind of figures are achieved through the exceptional quality of GivEnergy's products and made attainable through the accessible price they sold at. Right, Simon, so to get the ball rolling today, what are the main benefits of pairing solar panels with a heat pump system?
When you're looking at using a heat pump, particularly with solar panels and probably more so with battery storage, increasing your ability to store energy to use when you need it, when the solar isn't generating, is a great benefit to efficiency in the way you're buying your energy from. So what you have to consider is, with a heat pump, there is a minimum number of kilowatt hours that you're going to require in order to be comfortable. Once you're at that point, what you need to do is buy better. We can buy that energy from the sun, obviously through the solar panels. That's a huge benefit. But of course, we're heating at the time of year when we're producing the least amount of power. So what we then do is couple that with battery storage, which then allows us to utilize what sun we can, but also utilize mixed tariffs in order to utilize that energy later in the day when the peak cost is in. So what we're doing is controlling cost by buying the energy in the best way possible, either solar, cheap rates, or pre-stored energy in the battery storage system.
So, Laurence, can batteries improve the performance and efficiency of a heat pump system?
Probably not, actually. Performance, no. Efficiency, no. But they can drastically reduce the cost. I personally, having put a heat pump in, probably would never have considered doing it without having solar and batteries in the first place to offset the cost. I think once you're getting your energy at, say, sub 10 pence a unit, installing a heat pump is, especially with a government grant now for the boiler upgrade scheme, it's a no-brainer. Like the vast majority of our customers, they do solar, they do batteries, they do heat pumps. That's the order I would recommend that people actually do stuff, to be quite honest, Miles.
So from our perspective, when we put our heat pump in 6 years ago, based on the research that we actually did, obviously PV and the heat pump was a no-brainer for us. And batteries 6 years ago were only kind of up and coming. And the only reason we didn't pull the trigger on that at the time was because the cost of electricity was so cheap. I think we were paying 11p per kilowatt hour. You kind of fast forward now, it's over 30. So the ROI for us just didn't make sense at the time. Brian, is there a formula for homeowners to actually calculate an ROI on putting a battery in, especially if they've got a heat pump?
The problem with looking at specific calculations is that there's so many variables on a house by house, use by use basis. The point that Laurence just made there, the answer to your previous question, does a battery affect the performance or the efficiency? The batteries don't affect the actual efficiency and performance of the heat pump. The massive advantage of a battery is that it just reduces the cost. And this is all about optimal use of how homeowners set their systems up. Simon mentioned quite correctly that having a solar array, so obviously generating your own power is always going to be the cheapest, obviously. To store the energy when when the sun's shining but not necessarily being used is obviously of huge benefit. But it's taking advantage of the very widely available now time of use tariffs. We don't need to be overly clever about it. It's just a case of buying the electricity in most instances, I've just mentioned before, at a sub 10p level, when fundamentally most of the time, or a lot of the time, when the heat pump would actually be operating, it would be probably at the thick end of 30 pence a kilowatt. The actual specific calculations become difficult because, like I say, it's dependent on so many factors, but the simple fact is always going to be, when you're buying it, if you're buying it sub 10p rather than buying it at 30p, you're always going to be making huge savings.
One of the key things that needs to change around this conversation really is the discussion of ROI. Utilizing equipment like this in order to see some sort of investment payback doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. Usage case varies hugely from household to household, and the standardized calculations that we have don't really help with it. So we have a lot of usage cases from real world systems that have been in for quite some time now. But I think it's far more important to help homeowners understand that what they're actually buying is a secured price per kilowatt hour. When you're calculating what a PV system is worth, it's so much better to look at what we call levelized cost of energy than it is return on investment. Unfortunately, we have this as a hangover from feed-in tariff days. Got everybody to jump on board because this was going to make them lots of money and have a cruise every year off the back of your PV system. Well, okay, that's great, but it's gone now, and we have to view it in terms of our energy security. And for homeowners, energy security means cost, and we've seen that in recent years where the huge variance in energy prices has really impacted some families hugely. Talking about ROI kind of sticks a little bit, and we need to steer that conversation differently, I believe.
When we talk about heat pumps, there's one thing that people seem to forget, and that's comfort. Yes, the return on investment, blah, blah, blah. But I have, probably like you, Mars, I have a wood burning stove here, which I installed, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. You've got two, exactly, right? But ever since I put the heat pump in, I've not used it. And you know why? Because I never come home and go, oh, blimey, it's cold in here. I must put the fire on. The house is warm 24/7. If I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I need a cup of tea, I don't have to put my jumper on and what, I could walk downstairs in the altogether if I wanted and put the kettle on. It's 21 degrees everywhere. I think heat pumps are amazing.
Is the ROI calculation or the payback period, is that sort of, from an installer point of view, Simon, when you're out there, sort of talking to potential customers, I suppose, is the ROI question still very much at the forefront of their mind?
Absolutely. They're almost conditioned to want to see how quickly this thing is going to pay them back. It's a very, very weird question to me, particularly around heat pumps. I've never known anybody go for a gas boiler and wonder how quickly that's going to pay back for itself. It's kind of, it pays back when you're warm. If you're not sat there freezing, you can have a bath. It's kind of paid for itself. With batteries, there's such a wide range of kit available. So we're a GivEnergy installer. We do Solar Edge and we do Tesla, and that's pretty much our range. There's a huge variance in price across those brands and a variance of features available on them. What we still have to contend with are the calculations that we are handed from on high that we have to use to define what these systems are going to provide for the client. And real world experience tells us that those calculations are vastly wrong because they don't take into account usage behavior. They don't take into account tariffs, and we are not allowed to present that to a client as part of the calculation set. There's a lot of data out there that we can utilize to prove the point, but we're always having to come back to this conversation about this is what will really happen, but I'm not actually allowed to tell you that. Here's your ROI, which on your battery is going to be 14 years. Absolute nonsense. It's never going to be 14 years. I have a great one, actually. One of them was paying £6,000 a year on his electricity bill. Reasonable size house and heat pump, and they've got air conditioning, all that fun stuff. He's got one 13.5 kilowatt hour AIO, and his energy bill now is £2,000 a year. Now we've got an 8 kilowatt PV array on that as well, But between the two of those, that's his energy cost now. He's saving £4,000 a year, which if you want to look at it in terms of pure payback, that's a 4-year payback. So it was basically a 16 grand install. That's pretty good. And I can tell you now that that's not what the calculations tell you.
Do you need help understanding your heat pump? Then pick up a copy of From Zero to Heat Pump Hero, an essential guide offering practical advice and basic instructions for new heat pump owners to maximize system efficiency. Available in print and on Kindle, link in the description. We're starting to see a lot more experienced homeowners because I think that the air source heat pumps are now beginning to kind of permeate through the market where you're getting far more kind of homeowners that have had them for a longer period of time. And I tend to find that people in the first year are basically doing what you said, Brian, a lot of on-off controls because they're still trying to save that money. And it's when they get into the second and third winter that they actually start to realize that, hang on, if I actually run this thing low and slow, my comfort level is going to go up and I'm actually going to pay less money. And I'm beginning to see more and more questions along the lines of, is it possible to pair an air source heat pump by size to a battery array that can potentially run me through the day if I can charge up overnight? Is there a formula? So let's say, for example, I've got a 12 kilowatt heat pump and I want to have X amount of battery size to actually see me through the night, through the day, so that I can recharge again at like midnight. Is there a formula that will allow people to try and get a ballpark figure as to how much battery storage they would need in order to run that heat pump as cheaply as possible?
There's a few points to consider when you're looking at that. You're going to have to start really with the kilowatt hours used per day. How many kilowatt hours is that heat pump using a day? So let's just ballpark it out there. It's using 20 kilowatt hours a day. If that heat pump's using that, now we need to understand how many kilowatts. So what is the actual energy load? Not the duration, but the load. What's its peak? Now you've got a 12 kilowatt heat pump. If it's running well, let's say at its peak, it's going to pull 4-ish kilowatts. That's a reasonable demand for that size of heat pump at its coldest temperature. We now need a inverter system that can cope with that peak load to minimize the amount of import from the grid when it's at its maximum load. That's relatively straightforward to do. It's your installer and designer for your heat pump system should be able to tell you what your energy usage is going to be over the year, and you'll get an idea of what your monthly use is going to be, and just divide it by the 30 or 31 days, and it's going to be there or thereabouts. Same goes for the power load, the kilowatts of energy used. We're going to look at that and say, okay, let's say it's a smaller house, you've got a 5 kilowatt heat pump that can run perfectly happily off a small 3 kilowatt inverter. That's never going to be a problem, and you could probably back that up with a 9.5, 10 kilowatt hour battery. Relatively straightforward. We do, in all honesty, tend to find that most people go with twice that. With 20 kilowatt hours tends to be our minimum for a heat pump user. The other thing to consider is when you look at your tariffs, because obviously to leverage the battery to its maximum, we have to look at these time of use tariffs. When you're doing that, you have to look at the duration that you'll be able to buy cheap energy for. So my house, I have 32 kilowatt hours of battery storage with a combined charge rate of about 8 kilowatts. So we can work out off that how long it needs to charge up. It's about 4 hours. So if I have a cheap rate period that is shorter than 4 hours, I'm never charging those batteries up. We also need to allow a little bit for temperature variance as well. So when it's colder, they take longer to charge, that sort of thing. You might never see full capacity when you really, really need it. You might then need to look at either your tariff being longer for the cheap rate or a higher capacity inverter system. So maybe bumping, instead of having a 3 kilowatt single, you'd go for 2 3s, or maybe go for a single 6 kilowatt inverter or something like that. These are all pieces of a puzzle that you have to sort of connect together, but it all starts with understanding what that heat pump is going to require in terms of its energy demand and in terms of its energy load. And once we understand those two, we can work out very easily what the battery should be.
What Simon just said there about, sort of sizing the system correctly, I think that to me is a perfect example of why the ROI calculation is so difficult to quote. If the install isn't sized correctly in terms of not just battery power, but more so inverter sort of power and capability as well, this is all going to have a knock-on effect on people's ROIs, and there's nothing more dangerous in some respects is if you start quoting, it's a 4-year payback, it's a 5-year payback, it's a 6-year payback, and then people saying, well, that's not what I'm experiencing from my system.
Yeah, and I think that's the tendency to understate the return, I mean, back when we were selling solar sort of 7, 8 years ago and the payback was like 12 years, it was a kind of difficult sell. You had to really find a customer who was very motivated. But now, solar's probably a 4-year payback, and solar and storage is probably a 6-year payback. And it's like, well, if you're putting in good product that's warranted for years and years and years, basically what you need to do is have some capital. If you haven't got any capital, you're screwed.
How flexible are these systems? So if somebody's watching this and they're considering putting a battery in, maybe they've got a heat pump, maybe they've got PV, maybe they have got a time of use tariff, how flexible are these systems in order to be fully customizable for what they've got?
This is another key decision point in the battery system you choose. The configuration of these is critical from the software point of view, from how easy is it for the homeowner to link into their tariff provider, into their energy provider, or be able to program in their own time of use slots. That sort of thing is really, really important. And the information that system gives back as well, the data from it is very, very key in understanding how you're using your power. So products like GivEnergy, the Powerwall, the Solar Edge, all have very, very good user interfaces. It was actually one of the main reasons we took GivEnergy on in the first place. It wasn't because of the battery technology and the inverters, it was because of the software. And that's pretty much still the case, really. Is the software still, from a user perspective, still one of the best ones out there. It ties in beautifully into the tariff networks. Not faultless, but it does very, very well. And it certainly leads ahead of quite a lot of the other product that's out there. We see the same with the Powerwalls and with Solar Edge. They're very, very simple to tie up. When it comes to flexibility, if we're talking about how easily can a homeowner set them up to pick up tariffs, look at the software behind it. Forget about the hardware to some degree. Look at what the software can do, and most installers will tell you which ones are a pain in the bum and which ones are straightforward. There are some that, quite frankly, you just wouldn't want. Pick something that's simple to use. I would definitely say that we have people in the room who can sell you something that will do that very, very nicely and give you a very flexible system.
One of the questions that I often get asked is, when should I use energy? I find that the funniest thing. I'm like, we design our systems so you don't care. You just do whatever you want, whenever you want. We get you the cheapest energy possible. It's that simple.
That brand selection is just such an integral part of the decision-making process for homeowners. All too often in heat pump world, we tend to find that, there's a carboy installer. He gets appointed a job. He goes down to the local distributor, picks up a unit, slaps it in, botches the installation. It ultimately falls on that manufacturer. It's the manufacturer's name that gets slated. It's not the installer. The installer's come and gone. Nobody will ever remember Joe Blogs. The fact that it was a Samsung or a Mitsubishi, whatever it is that got fitted, that's the unit that now gets the bad reputation. If an installer does install one of your systems, for whatever reason they go out of business and that homeowner is really, really stuck, is there a hotline that they can call? Is there somebody that can actually contact to get their problem resolved?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a UK owned and UK based company. Our head office is actually in Stoke-on-Trent. In our head office, we have a technical support department. There's 26 people in it working office hours, and they work on Saturdays as well, actually. It's not AI, it's not a chatbot, it's individual trained. There's different tiers of sort of technical competence, if you like, because some of the queries that we get can be fairly straightforward and could be dealt with at a certain level, and then obviously depending on the level of query it sort of gets passed through second line and third line, etc. And fundamentally that tech support is there for two main reasons. One is to assist our installer network, so if there's issues which tend to be connectivity based, if I'm being honest, when they're being commissioned, there can be various sort of Wi-Fi issues, quite often to do with people's home Wi-Fi setups and routers, etc. The technical support's there for that installer network, but also very importantly is to support the homeowners. We don't have a direct association, if you like, to our homeowners from a contractual perspective, but our homeowners are core business. We've got something like, I think, 100,000 GivEnergy systems that are, in existence around the country at the moment. We're there to support them and to assist them with whatever issue that they may have. So that technical support department is there for their availability as well.
Have you got questions about heat pumps and renewables? Then head over to the forums at Renewable Heating Hub for practical advice from thousands of fellow homeowners and heat pump users. We had a homeowner recently post on our forums. They've worked out that they consume about 5,000 kilowatt hours of electricity over the heating season. They've got PV. and now they're trying to figure out, is there a way to capture as much electricity over the summer as possible to then try and run 5,000 kilowatt hours worth of electricity over the winter to keep their house warm? Is that a completely bonkers idea, or is that even remotely feasible?
Do you know, I've had philosophical discussions with customers about that. Believe it or not, at the household level, I think it's completely impossible. But at a national level, I think it's absolutely doable and absolutely feasible. There are compressed air type batteries. They're only about 60% efficient. But if you look at the UK, for example, over the course of the year, from April to September, we get tons of solar radiation. Absolutely tons of it. Our approach to what your homeowner is looking for is to use the grid to provide an income for the excess solar that you generate from April to September and build a credit on your account, and then minimize your energy cost from the sort of November, December, January months. And believe you me, it is entirely possible to not pay an electric bill again. And in fact, if I were to stop a man in the street and say, how much would you pay me to never pay an electricity bill again? The number they come up with is frequently more than the number we can do it for.
There's a completely different way to answer that question that Mars asked, which fundamentally you did there anyway. But you don't need to store the electricity that you're producing over the summer to use it in the winter. That actually is the completely wrong way to look at this. What you need to do is sell all the electricity that you're producing and just make sure what you buy, you're buying at a cheap rate. You don't need to store it. We have end users that come up to us at shows and events and things like that we do, that they say they've got their system set up with solar, and they're saying to us, we pay next to nothing. We don't use any of our solar, any of our self-generated energy at all. We don't use any of it. We sell it all. And everything we use, we buy at cheap rate, 8p.
It's exactly what I do in my house. Everything exports through summer, especially now once the tariffs exist. We'll have a while with these tariffs yet, but they will disappear eventually. We just charge off the cheap rate energy all the time and export everything else.
Laurence, another homeowner question for you. This homeowner says, we currently have a 12 kilowatts air source heat pump, and they have an existing 3.76 kilowatts solar array with the old feed-in tariff, which assumes 50% export back to the grid. We have an old 4 kilowatt Sunny Boy inverter. Any advice would be appreciated in terms of what I should be looking for. This is battery-wise. Currently, we are using between 15 kilowatts to 25 kilowatts per day, if that helps.
First things first, you don't say there, Mars, and you may not know, but right now, I'd upgrade the PV system if possible, if the roof space allowed for it. So panel density now is virtually twice what it was 12, 13 years ago. So you could double that system. From battery sizing perspective, I always say there's about 5 to 7 kilowatts of PV per power wall is my metric. You said they've got probably 4 kilowatts of PV. So 8 kilowatts of PV and a power wall, and you're at the 15 sort of kilowatt hour mark. If they've got extra money or something like that, then 2 power walls or GivEnergy all-in-ones. Realistically, upgrade the solar is the first thing and come off of deemed export. I mean, they're paying you a pittance for deemed export. If you look at an unbatteried or an unmitigated solar PV system, most people are exporting about 70% of the energy that they're creating. So not only are they getting done because they're only getting paid for 50% of it, they're also being paid at about 4 pence a unit, 5 pence a unit. Now, as Simon said, you can get 15 pence a unit. So the first thing to do is double the size of the PV system, and the second thing to do is install a decent sized energy storage system. That will pay back in less than 6 years.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. So that's a wrap. A huge thank you to today's panelists, Simon, Brian, and Laurence, for sharing their valuable insights into integrating solar, batteries, and air source heat pumps. And a special thanks, obviously, to GivEnergy for sponsoring today's episode and for supporting homeowners in their journey towards a more efficient, renewable home heating solution. Thanks for tuning in, and stay connected with us for more expert advice on sustainable home heating. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.